Perhaps you think that Jesus didn't exist. So, let's examine who Titus Flavius Josephus was for a moment. Josephus was a historian and writer who lived in the 1st century, and you can see from the dates that he was born just after the time that Jesus was supposed to have died. He was born Jewish, but was given a Roman citizenship later on. He had absolutely nothing to do with the Christians or the writing of the Bible. He was the 1st century equivalent of today's newspaper reporter, giving a candid and impartial view of world events. He wrote quite a few historical documents, of which the Antiquities of the Jews is one. Here is a section taken from that manuscript and translated from the Greek into English. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man. For he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as receive the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pontius Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the crucifixion, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him. For he appeared to them alive again the 3rd day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct at this day. Remember when this was written, in the 1st century, just a few decades after the life, death and resurrection of Jesus. And remember that Josephus had nothing to do with the writing of the Bible. So you now need to ask yourself, are the Jewish people the first of the clues, mysteries and parables which I mentioned a moment ago? History shows that humans invented many kinds of God, and therefore it is more than likely that the Jewish people invented their own God, like everybody else. But why would they invent a God which they didn't want? To confirm this, you need to read a little bit of the Old Testament history of the Jews, or just take my word for it. The Israelites, as they were called, did not get on at all well with this God, and eventually rejected him, her or it. In fact, if you read between the lines, what is happening today is exactly the same as happened 4,000 years ago. God is inconvenient, and people just want to get on with their lives without a sky dictator watching them 24/7. Just one more thing before we move on. If we assume for a moment that the Jewish people did not invent the Jewish God, then we will have to assume that God suddenly appeared, very much in the way that we read in Genesis. So why did God appear when he did? Well, the answer is actually in what I have already mentioned. In order to understand things which were out of their control, early humans invented many gods, and one of the reasons that the apparently real God appeared was to put an end to all these gods, idols, and false worship. In human terms you would probably call this jealousy, but as God is not human in the way that we know humans to be, then it actually wasn't jealousy in that sense. I use the word to help us understand the situation. Throughout the whole Bible you will discover a recurring theme. The real God doesn't want other gods around. From the famous 10 Commandments right up to the present day, the Hebrew Christian deity, this God demands absolute and exclusive attention, and this was the reason why he, she or it appeared when he did, to put an end to all the other gods. 3 of the famous Ten Commandments are about this very problem. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. And thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. But things didn't go at all well, even though God chose Abraham as the father and leader of the Jewish people. By the time that Moses became leader, many years later, the Israelites had become slaves to the pharaohs of Egypt, and this story of war, slavery, and wandering without a home continued for another 40 years as God rewarded and punished the people in equal measure. They were rewarded when they followed God and listened to what he said, and punished when they didn't listen and went their own way. Even recent history shows that the Jews have been scattered throughout the world and been persecuted and discriminated against in every century and every country. Why am I mentioning all this? Simply because we may think that the Bible is a dusty old book with no relevance to the present day, and as a result we have failed to see yet another clue which God has chosen to give us. Of course the Jews themselves are a major clue, but I'm not going to pursue that angle. Instead, I'm going to return to the sun gods, rain gods, and moon gods. These have long since disappeared, of course, but in another sense, they haven't. Anything which you spend time with in your life has the potential to become a god or an idol. Too much TV, too many video games, too much ambition in your career, too much time on the stock market, a house which is too big, a car which is too fast, a boat, a yacht, and so on. So, if you do catch yourself spending too much time at the golf club or following your football club, remember this sobering fact which I have spent the last 10 minutes explaining. The idol of the golf club or the football club is the reason why God appeared on earth some 4,000 years ago and appeared a second time in 1st century Palestine as Jesus. And what would that reason be? To save you from yourself and the 21st century idols. But I have wandered a bit, and we must return to the subject of the Bible. To summarise, we need to ask this question: why would the Jewish people go to so much trouble writing 39 books in the Old Testament and 21 books in the New Testament about themselves, when it was a story of failure and disbelief, bringing only suffering, persecution, death and destruction upon themselves? This is a summary of the Bible. Why would they do this? Why would anybody want to write their autobiography when it is a story of unrelenting failure? Is the fact that the Jewish people are so open, honest and unforgiving about themselves a fact which is in its favour, or is this a complete hoax? When we look at the Bible, are we looking at an absolutely immense put-up job, or are we again looking at an inconvenient truth?